Hi everyone, and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. Today I'm going to be continuing on with Why is Deku so good with kids? We're going to be on part 4, and this is going to be for both chapters 6 and 7 in this video. So starting out, chapter 6 is entitled, In Which Shota Makes a Call. Is this Midoriya Inko speaking? Shota asked across the phone, trying not to feel nervous. There was something intimidating about this woman, like she was a protective force not to be reckoned with. It made having conversations with her, especially hard conversations, extremely difficult, even when they took place on the phone. She was so nice most of the time, but Shota had learned by now that when it came to her son, she was sharp and determined. In other circumstances, it was admirable, but when it was aimed at him, well, it made him nervous, to say the least. Yes, that's me. You're Izuku's homeroom teacher, right? Can I help you with something? She sounded a bit jittery, and Shota couldn't help but get reminded of her son as she spoke. They had the same vocal quality and speaking habits. Yes, I had a couple questions about your son's behavior recently, if you don't mind. Inko sounded relieved as she answered back. I was wondering if I'd get a call about this. I'd love to help you out, but her tone grew decidedly more worried. You might want to talk to All Might, too. He and Izuku are pretty close, and he probably knows a lot more about his current mental state, what with Izuku not being home because of the dorm system and all. All Might again? What did those two have going on? Was Izuku his secret love child or something? He quickly disregarded that idea. Could you tell me about Izuku's previous quirklessness? He could practically hear Inko tense up on the other side of the phone. What about it? Shota clenched his free hand into a fist and then flexed it again, struggling with wording for a moment. How did it affect his life? I saw on his records that his quirk didn't come in until he was 15, which is rare, she supplied when he trailed off. Completely unheard of, he corrected her. She paused for a second, and he could hear her thoughtful breathing on the other side before she replied softly. He used to get bullied a lot. He'd try to hide it, but it would take a very bad mother to not notice her son coming home every day with increasingly bad bruises and burns. I did everything I could. I called the school. I called Katsuki's parents. I even called the police at one point, but nothing worked, and eventually Izuku told me that all I was doing was drawing more attention to him at school, so I stopped. Well, before that, I offered to help him move schools, but he said, and I secretly agreed, that any school he went to would have the same problems. I'm not sure how much you know about quirk discrimination, Mr. Aizawa, but the quirkless are considered weak, useless, and below all help. Izuku received multiple death threats, and Katsuki apparently even told him to commit suicide once, although I didn't learn about that one until much, much later. She paused to catch her breath after that speech, and Shota started to seriously consider expelling Bakugo. Maybe he could put him in corrective classes or anger management courses instead. It was hard to deny that the kid had potential, but someone who participated in suicide baiting probably wasn't the best fit for a hero course. Moving on from that, why on earth hadn't the police stepped in when she called? When you called the police, they said there wasn't significant enough evidence for them to make a case, and that Izuku was probably just being dramatic, she answered immediately. Glowering at the empty classroom, Shota sighed, digging out for a pen and paper. That was clearly illegal, and someone needed to get fired. Can I ask you who it was on the phone? I think their name was Arai. It was a long time ago, like I said. Izuku told me that it was making all the bullying worse, so I stopped trying to stop the bullying, and instead just took care of all his injuries when he got home. She sighed, sounding miserable. There wasn't much I could do about the psychological trauma, but he had a video he used to watch on repeat whenever he was having a bad day, so I pretty much let him use that to comfort himself. Did you ever try therapy? Shota asked, writing the name of the police officer down on his paper. I did, and actually it was going pretty well at first, besides the usual quirkus nonsense, but it was so expensive, and then some of his bullies apparently found out about it, and, well, that was the end of that. What quirkus nonsense? Shota asked sharply. Inko paused, maybe trying to decide how much to tell him or how to phrase it. Well, we've always had trouble with people refusing service when they found out he was quirkless. Shota ground his teeth together because, honestly, people were such illogical assholes sometimes. Some therapists were like that, although the last one we had for about 3 sessions, and it was going really well until the bullying ticked up again and Izuku asked me to pull him back out. Shota sat down in one of the desks and started taking notes as Inko listed the names of the therapists that had failed him. Do you want me to enroll Izuku in therapy here? He asked when she was done. If he wants to, I think that would be very good for him, although, her voice got tense again, you really should be careful around him, because he has a lot of secrets and he doesn't want to spill them to anyone, let alone a new therapist. It took him months to even tell me. I don't suppose you'll pass them on to me, will you? Shota asked dully, perfectly aware of the response he was about to get. It's not my secret to tell. You'll need to ask Izuku. Shota sighed, rubbing his forehead with one hand. Any thoughts on how to do that? I already tried talking to him, and he literally ran from the room. Inko echoed his sigh from across the line. Izuku prefers bluntness. Don't beat around the bush, just get to the point. Otherwise, he'll start anticipating that he won't like what you ask, and then he gets nervous and goes into flight mode. Right. Shota knew that now. He'd seen it happen. He wouldn't be making that mistake again. Moving on. Can you tell me about his quirk coming in late? She sounded almost wary as she responded. I'll tell you what I can, but again, Izuku is the one you should be asking about this. He nodded and then realized that she couldn't actually see him and said, Of course. My quirk is the ability to pull small objects towards me, and his father's, or is or was, I'm not really sure where he is right now, but it was the ability to breathe fire. Izuku didn't manifest either of those, and he has the extra toe joint that we were told means he's quirkless. He received his quirk on the day of the entrance exam, and he... What? Shota couldn't believe that. He couldn't, because that would mean that Inko Midoriya had applied to UA as a functionally quirkless individual, probably well aware that he would not be getting in, and had still tried. That would mean that the jump he did to save Uraraka was the first time that he had ever used his quirk, and that would mean that Midoriya was growing into his quirk at a rate completely unprecedented by anyone Shota had ever met. Yes, he said he got his quirk the morning of the entrance exam, and if you want details on that, you'll have to ask him. He told me that he would have gotten it sooner, but he was worried his body would explode. Almost anticipating the millions of questions swirling in Shota's head, again, she said, You'll have to ask him. Shota was starting to realize that there was very little information he would be gleaning from her on from this point. I think I will. Is there anything else I should know? All Might is a very bad teacher, she said bluntly. Shota honestly couldn't disagree, but it was odd hearing that she was bringing it up here, or maybe not. There was definitely something going on between those two, and Shota was going to figure it out if it was the last thing that he did. If Izuku does tell you the details of his quirk, I would appreciate it if you would join in on All Might's attempts at teaching, because at this rate, that man's going to get Izuku killed before he graduates. That might be true. Thank you very much, Midoriya-san. I will bring this up with Izuku and see what I can do to help him. Of course. Thank you for calling and checking in. Shota was about to hang up, but then he realized she seemed like she had something else to say. Sure enough, a moment later, she said, Izuku doesn't really ever... He doesn't like to brag, which I'm about to do, so don't tell him I said this, but, she sounded like she didn't know how to phrase what she was about to say, but thought it was important. When Izuku found out he was quirkless, he threw himself into the hero community. He's been watching heroes and quirks for a very long time, and because of that, he has pretty incredible skills when it comes to analyzing people. I'm not sure if you've noticed that. Shota didn't say anything. He'd noticed the kid was pretty good at quirk analysis, but he hadn't paid any attention to notice exactly how good. All I wanted to say is if you wanted to help him be even a better hero beyond just his quirk, I would aim for his ability to strategize and analyze other people's quirks. If you need proof, just ask him to do a quirk analysis on you. He'll never stop talking. She released a shaky breath and then finished. That's all. Thank you for calling. And then she hung up. Shota stared at his blank phone screen for a full minute before standing up and leaving the classroom. The class would be back soon enough, and he would rather confront Midoriya at a different time, as he had many questions to ask. So that concludes Chapter 6. We're going to move right into Chapter 7, entitled, In Which Midoriya Confesses. The next day, Midoriya did not appear to be feeling any better. Shota banished Bakugo to Uraraka's seat again and went through his lecture as normal, keeping a close eye on Midoriya, who didn't say anything to anyone the entire class time, and instead he just sat quietly at his desk, eyes focused on his hands. It was so bad that when the entire class filed out for lunch, Midoriya was still sitting at his desk, looking like he didn't have the energy to even stand up. Uraraka gave him a few worried looks, but Shota waved her out of the classroom, approaching Midoriya himself. Inko had said to be blunt, but it felt weird to just approach a very panicked problem child and ask a blunt question, so he instead stood in front of Midoriya's row of desks and asked quietly, How much did you sleep last night? Midoriya flinched. A couple hours? And how many is a couple? Shota asked sharply. Biting his lip, Midoriya said, Probably not enough? Right, Shota sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Maybe I should expel Bakugo, he grumbled, mostly to himself. That got Midoriya's attention. His head snapped up, eyes widening in shock. What? Why would you do that? He bullied you all throughout elementary and middle school. He participated in suicide baiting. Midoriya looked absolutely horrified. How did you find out about that? He gasped. I called your mother, Shota said honestly. Midoriya flopped his head over his desk, wilting. Don't expel Kacchan, he mumbled. He's going to be a hero, and he can't be a hero if you expel him. People who tell their classmates to commit suicide can't be heroes. Look, Midoriya's head popped back up, sporting a pained expression. Kacchan is never going to learn anything if you just expel him. His entire life he's been taught that treating people with weaker quirks as weaker people is okay, and that's never going to change unless someone teaches him. He's already gotten much, much better since he entered UA, so don't expel him. His head dropped down to rest on his desk again. Just give him some classes in quirk discrimination or anger management or something. Shota stared at the display of sheer maturity he had seen just from Midoriya. Sometimes he wondered where Eri had gotten all of her maturity from, and he forgot that she spends a lot of time with one of the most mature students in the class. His problem child might be self-sacrificial, danger to himself all the time, but he lacked nothing in compassion and basic considerateness, so he was significantly intelligent, as Inko had been quick to mention. Fine, I won't, Shota agreed. Shoulders slumping in relief, Midoriya sighed into the desk. Would you like to get therapy? No, Midoriya said, muffled by the wood of the desk. Why not? Too many things I don't want people to know, Midoriya answered. Shota was impressed by his honesty at least. Like what, he asked, hoping for an honest answer, and then feeling extremely surprised when he got one. My quirk, Midoriya said flatly. Hesitating for a moment, Shota considered pushing Midoriya. Now, could be really bad, or it could be really fruitful. He wasn't entirely sure which reaction he'd get, though, and he wasn't sure how to broach the subject bluntly enough to get Midoriya to answer, but softly enough to completely shut the kid down. I'm having a bad day today, Midoriya said, before Shota could decide, tipping his head up so his chin was resting on the desk. The amount of pain brewing behind his eyes made Shota's heart hurt. What was it Inko had said? Midoriya loved quirk analysis. So maybe the fastest way to cheer him up would be, Your mom told me you were pretty good at quirk analysis. Could you do one for me? Anything I can get to improve, I'd appreciate. Midoriya perked up so quickly it might have been funny in different circumstances. His back went ramrod straight, and the pained look in his eyes yielded to an excited light. Shota was distinctly reminded of Hatsume when she talked about her babies. Really, he said, looking so ecstatic, Shota wanted to laugh. Instead, he nodded. Midoriya turned in his chair and started digging through his backpack. Returning a moment later with a very scorched-looking notebook, he flipped it open on his desk and opened to a page that had a pretty good sketch of Shota's costume on it. Okay, so Eraserhead. He tapped his chin with the eraser end of his pencil while he looked over his notes. His voice had lost all the pain it had before, and now was just focused with a trace of passion beneath it. Your quirk is pretty awesome. As long as you're looking at something, you can erase the effects of its quirk. It doesn't really work for mutations, so you probably wouldn't be very effective against someone like Gang Orca, although you would be going against significantly less strength, and he's capable of with his quirk. Either way, you still have to be good at hand-to-hand combat, because once someone's quirk is erased, you're pretty much both fighting without quirks. That, or you could always try to team up with someone with a really offensive physical quirk. I wonder how exactly your quirk works when you're looking at someone. Like, if they were wearing a lot of clothes or body armor and you really couldn't see any skin, would it still work? Because if they're behind something, you wouldn't be able to see them, and technically wearing clothes is being behind a barrier of sorts. I wonder what the requirements are for you seeing them. Maybe it's like a body shape kind of thing, but then how far away would you have to be for it to work? Like, if they were just a speck in the distance, would you still be able to erase their quirk? Any weaknesses your quirk only works on while you're looking at someone, or if you blink or look away, you probably have some issues. Also, your quirk doesn't work unless you're looking directly at them, so you can't use mirror or goggles. I wonder if peripheral vision works. I would guess it does, as long as your focus is on someone, but in that case, maybe you could actually erase multiple quirks at the same time. Might be a little bit more multitasking than you could handle, but it would definitely be something to look into the next time you train. The other weakness I mentioned is blinking, but that could be avoided if you had a steady stream of water going into your eye, which might be vaguely uncomfortable, but could really save you sometimes. Could be an interesting support item, although you'd have to make sure that the water is clean. I wonder if your quirk still works if you have one eye closed. Then you could switch between which eye you're using to block the opponent's quirk, so you could hold it off for longer, although you'd have to do some practice in fighting half blind to get used to only having one eye open at a time. The blinking would have to obviously make it difficult for you to use your quirk in overly smoky areas or dry areas, so you would probably want to avoid fighting around fires, although misty or foggy environments would be really to your advantage, as they would allow you to keep your eyes open for longer and also would help you to make better sneak attacks. You probably also want to avoid big groups of people all at once like you did for USJ, because your quirk is better suited for more ambush than runaway type attacks. Not that there's anything wrong with that, he added, looking nervous all of a sudden. Shota didn't mind. Problem Child was right. Anyway, he did prefer ambushes. This was probably the most in-depth quirk analysis he'd experienced since he first met Nezu. Sitting down in the desk next to Midoriya, he gave him an encouraging nod. He really wanted to know where this was going. Evidently, reassured by Shota's expression that he wasn't going to get expelled, Problem Child continued. Yeah, so you'd really need good hand-to-hand. Have you ever considered using guns or something like a sort of gas that would kind of be like midnights and you could make your opponents fall asleep? That way you could stay in the shadows, erase their quirks, and then knock them out before they even knew what hit them. You don't have to be super close to erase someone's quirk, so that's an advantage, especially since losing a quirk is probably a disorienting experience for someone who's had their quirk almost since they were born. If I was going to try to beat you, I'd probably do some intense training without using my quirk first, then get you to a dry area with some hostages, maybe a fire scene or something so that there's not really a way for you to escape, or use your capture weapon without setting it on fire, then corner you and knock you out. Actually, it probably wouldn't be that hard if it was intentionally targeting you, he shrugged. Like he just said whatever it was that wasn't a big deal, but no one's really targeting you because you're underground, which was a really good move for someone with your quirk, by the way. If Suchan wasn't so bad around fires, she'd be able to beat you without a problem. Also, you might want to add some sort of hair tie to your costume. It's kind of obvious when your hair starts floating because it stands on end. That's when you're using your quirk. I wonder why that is. It's like your quirk has a side quirk, levitation sort of, but condensed to one thing. Why hair specifically, though? Dead cells? But then your nails would... to keep the hair out of your eyes, maybe. But then if you were upside down, would it? Or if the tied back already out of your eyes, then would the ends? He lapsed into a thought, biting on the end of his pencil while he looked over his notes. When it became apparent that Midoriya was too lost in thought to continue consistent muttering, Shota said bluntly, "Well, that was impressive." Startled out of his thoughts, Midoriya's eyes snapped up from his notebook. "Oh, not really. Your quirk is kind of a simple one." He looked horrified and added quickly, "Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's a really great quirk. It's super straightforward and easy to understand, and its only limitations are really just your eyes, so it's not that hard, I guess. I mean, I have more trouble analyzing my own quirk than yours." That sounded familiar. Shota could remember all the times his problem child had dropped into muttering about his own quirk and improvements and flaws. He'd never really registered how truly amazing the kid was at analysis until now. Maybe he should have paid more attention to all of the kid's Deku mutter moments, as Eri called them. "So how'd you get so good at it?" Midoriya looked vaguely uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and fidgeting with his pencil. "Well, I was quirkless for kind of a long time." He ducked his head almost like he was being ashamed of that, which was odd. Although, based on Shota's conversation with Inko, maybe he should have expected Midoriya to be ashamed about his quirklessness. "And because I didn't have a quirk of my own, I got really good at looking at other people's quirks, I guess." The kid probably could have been a really good quirk therapist or support worker if it weren't for the discrimination. That, and he clearly had his heart set on heroism. "Have you ever considered doing one for Eri-chan?" "I did an abridged one for her the other day," Midoriya said, shrugging. "She seemed interested enough in it, I guess. It was really cute when she gave me one back, though," he grinned. Bad mood temporarily forgotten. Shota knew that this was his best chance. "So, can we talk about your quirk?" Midoriya's expression tightened, but he nodded stiffly. "I don't like talking to people about it, but, I talked to All Might, and he said I could tell whoever I want since it is my quirk now." All Might again. Shota was getting tired of that sentence going through his mind, which was good because he was finally going to get some answers, so he wouldn't have to listen to his mind saying that sentence over and over again anymore. Midoriya huffed like he was trying to relieve some stress before saying almost apologetically, I think I should start at the beginning. I was born quirkless, I have the toe joint and everything, but ever since I saw a video of All Might saving people, I've wanted to be a hero. He kept talking, explaining everything, from Bakugo's bullying, the suicide baiting incident, to meeting All Might, and honestly, Shota was getting closer to punching something, because All Might was so clueless sometimes it was painful. When Midoriya said that All Might had told him he couldn't be a hero. Good Lord. What? Midoriya flinched back as Shota explained, voice getting dangerously high-pitched. He forced it back down. Let me get this straight. All Might saved you from a villain, but didn't check you into the hospital and then told you, a random middle schooler, that you couldn't be a hero, and he did it on a roof? Shota knew that he himself could be a little overly blunt with his students, but they were his students. It was his job to be overly blunt with him. Meeting some random kid and telling him he had no potential based on something as stupid as a quirk was ridiculous. Measuring potential was an important first step, and it seemed like All Might hadn't done that either. Midoriya nodded, looking anxious. But it's okay, because he took it back later. Shota wanted to bury his head in his arms. It didn't matter if All Might took it back. What mattered is that if he hadn't taken it back, or if Midoriya wasn't so goddamn stubborn, the kid probably wouldn't be alive right now. All Might was supposed to be a hero, and heroes weren't supposed to tell kids that they couldn't be heroes because of their quirks. And if All Might had any situational awareness at all, he might have had the ability to realize that Midoriya was having a tough time of it and to adjust his answer accordingly. Honestly, sometimes Shota was impressed, or horrified, that All Might had managed to become a hero at all. Then later, after I saved Kacchan from the sludge villain, All Might said I could be a hero if he gave me his quirk. Too many things were wrong with that sentence, and Shota had to pause to stare at Midoriya. Luckily, Midoriya seemed to anticipate that he would have questions, and he was waiting for them, an expectant look on his face. One thing at a time, Shota reminded himself. While his head was reeling from the fact that All Might could potentially give someone his quirk, and processing that obviously Midoriya had All Might's quirk, seriously, how he hadn't noticed that, the important thing right now was the student's health. So he pushed his curiosity aside to say, with an adequate amount of outrage, he told you could only be a hero if you had a quirk. Midoriya looked confused at that question. It clearly wasn't what he was expecting. I guess. I don't really think he meant it like that. He said he thought I'd be a good successor because I had what it took to be a hero. Which is what? Shota said dangerously low. Running into danger without thinking, Midoriya chirped. A second later, he seemed to realize what he'd said and gave Shota a nervous kind of look. Yeah, Shota probably would be murdering All Might later for encouraging the problem child to be self-sacrificial. Again, I don't think he really meant it exactly like that, Midoriya tried to backtrack. So, All Might's interesting comments aside, how exactly did he give you his quirk? Midoriya brightened up again, now that the conversation was going in a more predictable direction, and launched into an explanation about transferable quirks, and all for one, and one for all, and the previous users, and stockpiling. Shota's head was spinning by the end of it, but he got the gist. So, All Might gave you this quirk and then... Oh no, he didn't give it to me right then, Midoriya said, waving his hands in front of him as if to push away the comment. If he'd given it to me right then, when I was still weak and had no muscle mass, my body would have exploded. Sorry. Shota didn't think he'd been any closer to slamming his head into a desk in his life. All Might gave you a quirk that it could explode your body? Bobbing his head up and down, Midoriya hummed. Yes, but it's okay because I trained for 10 months first, and I cleaned all of Dagoba Beach. Shota stared. He had heard somebody had cleaned Dagoba Beach and that it was significantly cleaner than it ever had been before, and that people had actually been using it as a beach now. But he had no idea that his problem child had been the one to clean it. That was you? Yes, and then the day after of the entrance exam, All Might said that I was ready, and I ate some of his hair. Then I took the entrance exam. It didn't manifest until Uraraka almost died, and I ran straight into danger. He looked almost embarrassed about that now. He gave you his quirk the day of the entrance exam, Shota said, rubbing his forehead tiredly. Problem child didn't seem to think there was anything wrong with that. And why didn't you tell me about any of this before? The kid started to curl in on himself, and Shota felt bad for pushing like that when he was clearly having a rough day already. It wasn't my secret to tell, really. It was All Might's until One for All died in him, so now it's mine. Right. The kid looked absolutely exhausted at this point, and Shota couldn't blame him either. It was hard telling big secrets like that, especially after a panic attack, however well hidden it was. I'm not going to push you to tell me any more today, Shota said firmly. Midoriya looked so drained that Shota added, For homework, would you mind writing me an in-depth analysis for Eri? Sure enough, Midoriya perked up again, looking excited. Of course! He packed up his stuff and stood up, heading out the door. When he was almost there, he paused, thinking hard for a moment. Did you mean what you said yesterday? He asked softly, turning back slightly. That you would still like me if I was quirkless? Yes, I meant that, Shota said, voice a little sharper than he would have liked, but he was annoyed with whoever had given his problem child so many self-esteem issues. The kid was too talented to have people like that holding him back. Problem child, you would have been an amazing hero, even without a quirk. Midoriya gave him a look like he had hung the stars himself, before nodding once and disappearing around the corner. Shota sighed. His problem child seemed happier now. Anyway, so he must have done something right. All Might, on the other hand, Shota's eye started to narrow angrily. All Might had some explaining to do. So that concludes Chapter 7. We've only got one more chapter left of this fic, and I'll be continuing that in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one as much as I did, and as always, just drop some comments down below if you have any fics that you want me to read or look over and potentially do in a future video.